talking about Strategy 24 Cognate strategies. And before I begin my demonstration, it's important to define what are cognates and why we teach them in the classroom. The textbook states that cognates are words in two languages that share similar meaning, spelling, and pronunciation. And while English shares a linguistic base with many other languages, we will be focusing on specifically the relationship between words, those cognates in English and in Spanish. So here's an example word that I've provided, familia and family. Both of these words have the same meaning, similar sounds and pronunciation, and very similar spelling. So why do we teach them in the classroom? We teach cognates because they are the bridge for a Spanish speaker to the English language. Cognate awareness allows a student to use words in their home language to help them better understand English and build out that vocabulary. And in the classroom, when we've done our job and explicitly taught those cognates, um, we are ensuring that 70% of the 570 words that they should know on that academic word list, that they are familiar with and they have a good understanding of what it means. So in the classroom, we can explicitly teach um, these cognates, and this is known as cognate instruction. It's beneficial in supporting that cognate transfer in our ELLs, and there's steps I've outlined here on how to effectively do this. So anytime you're about to introduce text of any kind to your Spanish-speaking students, you want to look for those cognates. And there's many resources to help you accomplish this, whether you're running the document through a translation program in Google and having the text generated in that language and then looking for those cognates. There's cognate word lists that are out there too. But one key thing to note is if the text has a lot of cognates, try to focus your instruction on the most important words that will help them unlock the meaning of the text. Next, you're going to want to provide instruction in the meaning of the English and Spanish cognates, and you'll see how I discuss that in the next few slides. You want to focus on those spelling differences, and we do that because when we teach them that linguistic base that the languages share, that root will look the same. That will help them start to identify those patterns. All they really have to look for is the sounds that are different on, let's say, the end of the word. And you'll see some examples of that tonight. One thing that the textbook emphasizes is always use visuals and charts. You can have a cognate wall set up somewhere in your classroom. So anytime you study a word, you've posted it where they can refer back to it to help them with pattern recognition, that word study, and verbalization when needed. As you are teaching, you also want to be mindful of the different levels of English development among your students and adapt your instruction to meet them where they are. You want to make sure when you're teaching cognates, you're teaching it across the curriculum and across that cross-curricular teaching as well, and vary up your instructional approaches. Keep it fresh on how the students are identifying those cognates. And then always monitor your students and reteach them as needed. Give them extra guided practice when you're coming across that academic vocabulary. So for the purposes of tonight's modeling, I want you to picture that you are watching me teach a fourth grade class, science. We're in the science block, and we have just started a new module on how animals adapt to their environment. So I would start the lesson with a slide that poses the essential question at their desk. Students would consider, how do animals' body parts and behaviors help it survive in its environment? And I would let them know that we are going to think about that essential question as we read our focal text. What do you do with a tail like this? I would then ask my students to come to the carpet, and they would be bringing with them a writer's notebook and a Spanish-English dictionary. I, as the teacher, would have my focal text ready to go. I would have either a whiteboard with me. I would maybe do this on my larger whiteboard. I could have a PowerPoint slide ready to go, which I do for tonight, or I love anchor charts. You could use anchor charts, something that is going to post visually that Spanish word that they may already know and the English word that it's related to. So as we get started, our new module has some pretty important big idea science words that you'll need to know in order to better understand this text. So as you can see, and I would point to the first word, we have this word here in information. Can any of my students tell me how I would say this word? I would call on a student that raises their hand and they would give me the Spanish pronunciation of that word. I would then ask my Spanish speaking students, what do you know about this word? And see if they have the definition for information that they can use to connect información to the definition. And then I would show them the English word. I would ask one of my strong English speaking students who can tell me how we say this word. I would point to someone and they would read the word information. I would then go ahead and reinforce and have them repeat the sounds with me, información, information, and then I would say the definition again. I would very quickly point out that root and form in both words is the same. What's different is the spelling, the ending, and there's an important morphology piece that I will point out once we get through the word adaptation, where CION makes this sound and English it makes this sound. And recognizing that pattern will help them identify future words with that suffix as they develop their vocabulary. I would do the same routine for the remaining words on the anchor chart. However, I already anticipate that my students are maybe not going to know what function or adaptation means because this is what we're teaching. So I would have them use their Spanish English dictionary to find the word in Spanish, read the definition, and then we'll go ahead and make that relationship, make that bridge between how they say it in Spanish, how they say it in English, and that these words mean the same thing. Um, and depending, like I mentioned earlier, on their language development level is how I would differentiate the modeling, the guiding, that instructional practice when using the dictionary. So now we would get into the read aloud, which I'll model one quick activity you can do during the read aloud as well. So I would tell my students, it's time for the read. I want you to listen and look at the illustrations as I read through this book. And remember, if you hear a word that sounds like a word you already know in Spanish, I want you to raise your hand. At that point, we will stop and talk about the meaning of this word before adding it to our cognate chart. And I have my sticky notes at the ready. I'm going to write down that word and add it to the chart at the end, along with all of our big idea words from today. So I would go through, of course, and do the normal reading aloud protocol, but I'm going to go ahead and fast forward to the first page. And I did this intentionally because I want them to recognize that first word is a cognate. So I'm expecting my students to raise their hand. I'll start the read. Animals use their noses, ears, tails, eyes, mouths, and feet in very different ways. Okay, did anyone catch a word in our read aloud just now? That might sound like a word you know in Spanish. And I expect my students to go ahead and raise their hand and go, animal. Okay, what word does that sound like in Spanish? Animal or animales. I'm sorry, excuse me. And can you tell me what that word means? So there I would write the word animal and animales down on my sticky note, ready to transfer it to the anchor chart. Then I would continue to read through the rest of the book during the 30-minute read aloud, going through that raise your hand, stop and talk activity, and discussing at the end when they get into the informational text portion of this read aloud, where those big sciencey words are when we're discussing adaptations and predators and habitat and things like that. So one final note before we wrap up the cognate strategy. There's so much more to it, but that was just a quick demonstration of what that would look in a read aloud. We want to be explicit with teaching cognates. We also want to help students avoid the pitfalls of false cognates. So just as you would post any words you have learned that Spanish cognate for that English word up on that wall. You want to have a section designated for false cognates and let them know sometimes we are going to encounter words in two languages that could be spelled the same or similarly, could even sound similarly, but they can have different meanings. And point out, for instance, ropa in Spanish, it looks like this English word rope. But ropa, when you ask a Spanish speaker, they'll tell you, oh, that means clothes. In English, rope means this. And then you would show them a picture. And of course, this would piggyback off of any of your vocabulary cards you have labeled and all the other strategies that are being taught throughout this course. But we just want to make sure that we're very clear and explicit, just like we would with teaching cognates, those perfect cognates and near perfect cognates. We want to teach them the false ones as well. All right, and thank you so much for your time and attention on Strategy 24 today.
Hello everyone, my name is Paula Danson. Today I'm going to be talking about the legal history of English language learners, OCR and DOJ strategies, specifically number 36, but my partner Heather did number 21. So you're probably asking, what is strategy number 36, culture studies? So this is a strategy where students research and present aspects of their own culture or another culture. It combines things like language development, research skills, and cultural validation. So in language development, that's things like reading, writing, or even comprehending or speaking. Even listening and retaining English in conversations would be language development, and cultural validation, making sure that those kiddos feel like their culture is important, that they're valued, that they're respected. The main idea is that students are able to use their cultural knowledge as a foundation for their academics by researching on meaningful and cultural topics while simultaneously developing academic English and content knowledge. So, in simpler terms, this is pretty much just allowing students to use their primary language because obviously that is their comfort, but we want them to grow off of that and expand their English knowledge. So, why is this important? Strategy number 36 means that students' cultural knowledge is the core content for their academic learning, but it also transforms culture into teaching research, into teaching writing, into teaching speaking, into teaching critical thinking. And rather than just a back burner, it's more of a side note as well. So, using strategy number 36 in a speaking slash listening context. So, for example, if a student were to create a cultural collage, whether that be an image of food, whether that be an image of clothing, or even a snippet of music from their language or their culture, each student would present that collage to the class in English. The students that are in the class, their classmates, would ask them questions, and those students would have to answer those back in English. So this is a strategy that is evident because it scaffolds speaking practice in a more meaningful identity-based way rather than just your speech English routine where they're just learning the same thing over and over again. It's not personalized and it's not an actual real life situation that could benefit them. Not saying that those speaking drills or the routine English each week isn't beneficial, but when they are put in a real life situation, it will benefit them more in actually communicating with others rather than just learning proper English. So, what is strategy number 36? This is culture studies. That means that you are embedding the students' cultures while they're learning. So, this is important because it helps them not only have a sense of identity, like I mentioned earlier, but it also helps them have a feeling of appreciation. So, they do feel more included. And lastly, they actually may engage more often with something that they're more familiar with. So, if they're put into an environment where they do feel shell shocked, they are less likely to actually want to engage. So if you set them up for success and you are making them feel included and you're showing them that their culture and their language is appreciated and valued, they will also want to engage more. So this will enhance the English language learners' peer learning and sharing by having kids learn about one another's cultures through activities and perspectives. And it will actually bridge that academic language by the students practicing specific language catered to them and their needs. This will also stem off the idea of integration content and language by allowing or connecting the cross curriculars. So, for example, how sociology and history are kind of intertwined with one another. So, there are many different ways to use this in the classroom. You can use culture collages, student led presentations, activities, or even just having culture or heritage text around your classroom. So I broke these down into specific examples. These are the strategies in the classroom that I mentioned. The first one being a cognate scavenger hunt. So a cognate is a word that sounds similar in two different languages. So for example, familia and family. The Spanish speaking student will be able to pick up that familia means family in Spanish and vice versa. Family means familia in Spanish. They'll start with intro to cognates, and then they'll do a group hunt and end with their shared findings with classmates in small groups. This will help them feel, again, less shell shocked, and they'll actually be able to speak a little more freely, and they'll get that practice in. Culture collages. So they can start with a brainstorming activity. You can show them examples kind of like on the side here. And you'll have the students create their own collage, and they can conclude with a gallery walk. It would be a bonus if the kids wanted to share and kind of go into detail of what they put and why they put it, but obviously this is just for more visual than anything. And then lastly, comprehensible input is giving students language they can understand, comprehend, and grow from. So Krasner's theory intertwines with comprehensible input because this is an input that's meaningful, and it's also meant to be a slight challenge. So this is to make content accessible to the English language learner students without simplifying it for them or kind of just giving it to them. And lastly, we have the activities that imply cultural studies. These could be geared more towards the older students, whether they're in middle school or high school, but they could also be beneficial to upper elementary school kiddos as well. The first one being an oral interview. So students can conduct an interview with a family member, an elder, a peer about their traditions, their migration stories, or even just cultural values. And they get the choice of writing a report or even creating just like a podcast or a video if they were up to that, and they would share it with the class and present it. This would build both research and speaking skills in English, which are two very useful things, especially as they climb up the ladder in education. In artifact sharing or a culture box, which you may have heard of before, this would be geared more towards the younger kids, but definitely more open to the upper levels as well. So students would bring in an object, whether that be a photo or a symbol from their family culture or their home culture, their family heirloom, or something that's important in their culture that they want to share. So they would explain its significance in English again, and then answer questions in English, and this will build their descriptive language skills. So actually going in depth in answering multiple questions rather than just the broad basic questions. They would actually dig deeper and learn to dig deeper in these situations, and it would also help them with their presentation skills. So this explains strategy number 36, cultural studies in English language learners. Thank you so much.